Yes, yes, yes! The Great American Poetry Competition is here. It's what you've been waiting for your whole life, although you never knew. The Society of Classical Poets is proud to be a Freedom 250 partner, and this competition is being held in honor of America's 250th birthday. So a few basic guidelines. There is a 130-line limit, which, not coincidentally, is the length of Longfellow's famous poem, Paul Revere's Ride. The poem can be fewer than 130 lines, but it should not exceed that. There is a $20 submission fee with a link on how to pay, and the competition is open from now until July 4th at midnight.
The Battle of Wits has begun.
It is structured around several distinct Freedom 250 prizes in different categories, which I will talk about below. But the first question is, you are wanting to submit a poem, so what should you submit? Some ideas for what to write about may include a great American hero, an important event in American history, a piece of quintessential American culture, or the indomitable American spirit. Although that is up to you, it doesn't necessarily have to be one of those things. However, there are some things which you should definitely not write about for this contest. On the Poetry Foundation website, there is a page called July 4th Poems, and this page features many poems written on this theme. Two of them, The New Colossus by Emma Lazarus and Walt Whitman's I Hear America Singing, are classic poems in this vein. However, all the other poems on this list are, without exception, terrible. They are whiny free verse rants about how the promise of America is unfulfilled. For example, right next to the top poem, The New Colossus, which is about the Statue of Liberty, there is a poem about immigration that tallies harsh realities that sometimes follow the Statue of Liberty's greeting. It begins, "We are born with dreams in our hearts," and ends with, "Some will die and others will go on living without a soul, a future, or a reason to live." Okay.
You fell victim to one of the classic blunders.
If this is the kind of verse you like to write, you may submit your bad poem to one of the 1,000 other poetry competitions that are available out there and that love this kind of stuff, which I should add is almost all of them except for us. So submit your stuff elsewhere, but not here. So now that we've gotten that out of the way, let's talk about what you should submit. The judges have come up with 6 general criteria. 1. The poem should be metrical. The meter need not be perfect, but it should be apparent. Free verse is not absolutely forbidden, but it is not what we do here at SCP. Maybe if it has all the other necessary qualities, it might receive an honorable mention in a best case scenario. 2. The poem should be well written. No obvious mistakes in grammar or sentence structure, understandable overall. Well-written poems involve the use of literary devices, although it should not be excessive in this degree to the point where it overwhelms the thought or might confuse the reader. 3. Celebratory. This may be the most important point. It's about the tone, the feeling. It meshes with the choice of America as a subject. If someone writes about America without celebrating America, your poem will not win. It can celebrate difficulties overcome, but let's have celebration as the focus. 4. Positive outlook. This overlaps with the celebratory tone, but just to be clear, let's avoid a narrow or critical approach. Now, there is an exception to this in the satire and light verse category. In order to be funny, a lot of times you have to make fun of things. But you should be careful about what you're making fun of and how you do that. There's a balance to strike here, and I will talk more about that when we discuss the specific categories. 5. It would really help if your poem focused on civic virtue. There might be exceptions to this. It isn't as necessary a requirement as the first 4, but special attention will be given to poems treating the virtues of patriotism, good citizenship, and gratitude for America's gifts. These are things that involve strength of character, in addition to love of country and appreciation of its beauties. 6. The common touch. Would the poem sound good if read to the general public over the radio, or performed in front of a live audience? Or is it some obscure intellectual exploration where nobody knows what you're talking about? Your poem should be something that normal people can hear and immediately understand. That's not to say it can't have elevated diction or needs to be written in a fourth grade vocabulary, like most free verse poems today are. But it should be something that doesn't require special knowledge to comprehend. This is not Ezra Pound's cantos. So, having established the general guidelines, let's move into the specific prize categories. First, there is the Henry Longfellow Prize for Odes and Ballads. Longfellow is a poet very dear to my own heart. He was once the most famous poet in America and is now considered to be kind of a second rater, and I think that is unfair. He has a reputation for being a sentimental poet, but he was very prolific and there was a wide variety to his output. My personal favorite is Torquemada, about the inquisitor who is so zealous he orders his own daughters to be burned to death. But nevertheless, he is most famous now for his celebratory patriotic poem, Paul Revere's Ride. And he is an ideal choice to name this prize after. So, breaking down this category, first, what is an ode? Well, an ode is simply a poem that praises something. Now, historically, there are three basic types of odes, and the first two are named after two of the great ode writers of the ancient world, and that is the Pindaric and Horatian odes, and then the third is the irregular ode. Pindar wrote about ancient Greek athletes, and his odes have a very specific three-part structure of strophe, antistrophe, and epode. I'm not going to explain any more about what that is because we are not requiring you to do that. Nor are we requiring Horatian odes, which are more meditative than Pindar's odes and typically written in more uniform quatrains. Pindar and Horace are great, and if you want to submit Pindaric or Horatian odes, you are free to do so. But we in modern times tend to follow the irregular ode form, which, as it sounds, doesn't really have a specific defined meter or rhyme scheme. The main criteria is that it just needs to be praising something. What that something is variable. There's a lot of leeway. Now, Grecian urns are not very American-y, unless you want to praise the Batesville Urn Manufacturing Company based in Batesville, Indiana, which has some really nice urns, I have to admit. Pablo Neruda has a poem called Ode to My Socks. So whether you want to write about something mundane or more heroic, you can. Next, the ballad. What I love about the ballad form is its narrative aspect.
But it's so simple.
This is your opportunity to tell a great story in verse. This is not to be confused with the ballade, a medieval French form that was often about courtly love and written by knights or chevaliers to their ladies. Ballads, by contrast, arose first as folk tales, so it has a common origin rather than a courtly one. And often there was a public aspect to this. They have a very simple structure that can be recited easily. Often ballads are heroic in nature, and in that sense they're kind of akin to epics. In fact, occasionally a poem that is a ballad in structure has also been categorized as an epic, and here I have in mind The Ballad of the White Horse by G.K. Chesterton. Today, Chesterton is mostly known for his witty aphorisms, but he was also a great poet. Ballad of the White Horse is one of the best epics and one of the best ballads of the 20th century. It is an epic poem written in ballad form about King Alfred the Great's struggle against the Vikings and his great victory at the Battle of Ethandun in 878. If you've seen the show The Last Kingdom, this event was the climax of season 1. And Chesterton's poem is that story in verse form, alas, without Uhtred the Bold in a starring role. And if I could think of another model for this, I can think of no better example than Robert Macaulay's Lays of Ancient Rome. Daily Roman thought. This was once universally read by school students in Britain. Alas, no more. But his most famous lay is about Horatio at the bridge. It's the story from Livy about how this defender of Rome stood on this bridge and single-handedly held off an invading force of Etruscans. And I just want to quote from this passage because it is so fantastic. Then out spoke brave Horatius. the captain of the gate. To every man upon this earth death cometh soon or late. And how can man die better than facing fearful odds for the ashes of his fathers and the temples of his gods? And for the tender mother who dandled him to rest, and for the wife who nurses his baby at her breast, and for the holy maidens who feed the eternal flame, to save them from false Sextus that wrought the deed of shame. Hew down the bridge, Sir Consul, with all the speed ye may. I, with two more to help me, will hold the foe in play. The ballad form was once very popular, but with the rise of modernism, it has become yet another one of those things that nobody writes anymore. Traditionally, there is a quatrain structure of ABAB, alternating between 3 and 4 feet, and sometimes just rhyming on the B, then sometimes rhyming both. However, as with the ode, we're not going to be strict about this. I'm really excited about this prize because this is your opportunity to craft a really awesome story that doesn't necessarily have to be about a hero or a battle. It could be about something more ordinary. It can be more mundane, but it should tell a story in a celebratory way that emphasizes the virtue of the character. This is the furthest thing from a Sylvia Plath style confessional wallowing in your depression poem. On to our second category, the Ogden Nash Satire and Light Verse Prize. Now that's also a bit of a mouthful. Let's break that down. Ogden Nash is maybe the funniest poet in American history, and this prize is named in his honor. This is a more diffuse category than the Longfellow Prize. So often in art competitions, humor tends to get short shrift. And almost always in poetry competitions, especially the big ones, there's this hyper serious tone where the poet is trying to sound, very important and relevant to our times. And I just find all of that, sometimes at least, tedious and even kind of pretentious. And even though this is a classical poetry site and we're talking about celebratory themes, that doesn't necessarily have to be solemn, they could be funny. This is an opportunity to balance reverence with wit. And I emphasize that because if you're going to make fun of something, your best route is to poke lightly while also celebrating. So Horace's satires made fun of city life while celebrating rural life. So you're opposing vices against virtues. Alternately, you can explore something in a humorous way that isn't vicious but remains charming. I would say that this type of verse, light verse and satire, in order to be really memorable, does often hinge on having funny rhymes, often feminine rhymes with more than one syllable, although not necessarily. Ogden Nash has some great stuff with very simple rhymes, but he just makes it come off in a way that works, even though the rhymes are totally predictable. Here is Song of the Open Road. I think that I shall never see a billboard lovely as a tree. Perhaps, unless the billboards fall, I'll never see a tree at all. Alternatively, take this poem. A bit of talcum is always welcome. You can be inventive in this category in a way that you really can't be with more serious poems. In terms of forms, this is pretty diverse. For people who might struggle to confine themselves to an ode or a ballad, this offers more possibilities. It could be a poem in heroic couplets like those of Alexander Pope, a medium length mock heroic verse poem. It could be limericks, it could be a verse epistle, a satirical letter in rhyme, or a dramatic monologue, maybe. It could be epigrams, succinct poems often in couplets or quatrains, and this is Ogden Nash territory here. One suggestion there is if you're writing epigrams, it should maybe be a chain of epigrams so that you're not just submitting one epigram. Because if you just submit a 4-line poem, that might be too brief and is probably unlikely to win out against a longer poem. I would say the same thing about the Clarihue, a great poetic form that is 4 lines featuring a person's name in the first line and 3 lines of commentary. Maybe you want to submit a Clarihue cycle on the founding fathers or something. The possibilities are really pretty endless just in terms of form, and your submission doesn't have to necessarily be any of those things I just mentioned. Third, there is the Robert Frost Sonnet Prize. This is probably the thing I need to say the least about. If you don't know who Robert Frost is, then there's just something wrong with you. It is a strong indication that you never received a decent education. And if you know anything about traditional poetry, you probably know something about Shakespeare's sonnets. Hopefully, you learned about that in English class. But if it's something that you are uncertain about, then you can refer to my video, How to Write Sonnets 800 Years in 12 Minutes. Finally, there is the Freedom 250 Youth Prize for high school students. The judging criteria here will be more lenient for young people. In terms of rhythm, for example, formerly we have allowed consistent syllable counting to substitute for meter. And there's also no specific requirement as far as form. It could be a sonnet, ode, ballad, or something else entirely. And the idea here is just to encourage our young people to become involved in our glorious traditions. Although, like the other submissions, these should still follow the 6 general criteria outlined at the beginning of this video. So, that is our contest. If you want to celebrate America and win a little bit of cash in the process, do participate. We look forward to your submission. Thank you and good luck. Ta ta.